Some wounds run so deep, a man would rather face a lifetime of loneliness than risk his heart again. For 30 years, Josiah Crane has lived alone high in the mountains, avoiding people and keeping the world at arm's length. The locals say he's a ghost who disappeared into the wilderness after losing everything that mattered. His cabin sits miles from anywhere, surrounded by snow and silence. He wants nothing from anyone. But on the coldest night in years, during a blizzard that could kill a man in minutes, he hears a knock at his door. When he opens it, a woman collapses at his feet, half frozen and terrified. She's running from something. And whatever it is followed her straight to his doorstep. What could make a woman risk death to reach a man the world forgot? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story resonates with you, subscribe, because tomorrow brings something special. The year was 1852, when Josiah Crane first laid eyes on Sarah Mitchell. He was 25 years old, working his father's farm in the green valleys of Western Virginia, and she was the daughter of the town's only doctor. She had honey-colored hair that caught the sunlight and a laugh that made even the hardest men smile. When she looked at Josiah, she saw past the quiet exterior to the man beneath, thoughtful, capable, and kind in ways he never advertised. Their courtship was the talk of the town. Every Sunday after church, Josiah would walk Sarah home, carrying her Bible and her father's medical bag. They'd stop by the creek where willows dipped their branches into the clear water, and they'd talk about their future. A small farm, Sarah said, with a garden and maybe some chickens. Children at least 3, she insisted with a teasing smile. A life built on simple joys and honest work. Josiah saved every penny he earned. He built a small cabin on a piece of land his father gifted him, working by lamplight after his daily chores were done. Sarah would visit with her mother, bringing food and offering opinions on where the windows should go, how large the kitchen needed to be. She had opinions about everything, and Josiah loved that about her. She made him believe in possibilities he'd never considered before. They set the wedding date for the first Saturday in October, when the leaves turned gold and the air carried the promise of harvest. Sarah's mother sewed the dress. Josiah's father commissioned a ring from a silversmith in Richmond. The whole town prepared to celebrate. But 2 weeks before the wedding, a fever swept through the valley. It came on fast, burning through households like wildfire. Sarah's father worked day and night tending to the sick, and Sarah insisted on helping him. She had her mother's practical nature and her father's calling to heal. Josiah begged her to be careful, to let others take the risk, but she wouldn't hear it. "People need help," she told him, her hand gentle on his cheek. "I can't turn away from that." "You wouldn't want me to." She was right, of course. It was one of the things he loved about her certainty about what was right, her unwillingness to choose safety over conscience. The fever took her on a Tuesday morning. Josiah had seen her the evening before, and she'd seemed tired but well enough. By dawn, she was burning with heat. Her father tried everything: cold compresses, willow bark tea, prayers whispered over her thrashing form. Nothing worked. By sunset, she was gone. Josiah didn't speak at the funeral. He stood beside the grave in the clothes he'd planned to wear at their wedding, the ring heavy in his pocket, and felt something inside him break so completely he knew it would never properly heal. The town meant well. People brought food, offered condolences, shared their own stories of loss as if comparison might provide comfort. Sarah's father, hollowed out by grief, could barely look at Josiah. The unspoken accusation hung between them. If Josiah had insisted harder, if he'd forbidden Sarah from helping with the sick, she might still be alive. It didn't matter that Josiah had tried. It didn't matter that Sarah had made her own choice. The weight of what if crushed him anyway. 3 weeks after the funeral, Josiah packed what he could carry, sold what he couldn't, and left Virginia before dawn. He rode west, away from everything familiar, away from the half-built cabin and the questions and the pitying looks. He rode until the mountains rose so high they scraped the sky, until he found a place where no one knew his name or his story. That was 30 years ago. Now, in the winter of 1882, Josiah Crane was 55 years old and as much a part of these mountains as the granite peaks themselves. His cabin sat in a small clearing at the end of a narrow valley, surrounded by pine and spruce, accessible only by a trail that disappeared under snow for half the year. He'd built it with his own hands from logs he'd felled and shaped, positioned carefully to catch the southern sun and shelter from the worst of the northern winds. The cabin was 16 feet by 20. With a stone fireplace he'd mortared himself, a sleeping loft above, and a root cellar below. The windows were small glass, was precious this far from civilization, but positioned to give him sight lines in all directions. A man alone needed to see what was coming. His days followed patterns worn smooth by repetition. Rise before dawn, check the trap lines, gather firewood, tend to whatever needed tending. He hunted elk and deer, trapped beaver and fox, cured the meat and sold the pelts twice a year to a trader who made the climb up from the territorial settlements. The trader, a gap-toothed man named Bridger, was one of maybe 5 people who knew Josiah existed. "You still alive up here, Crane?" Bridger would ask each time, as if expecting to find a skeleton instead. "Still here," Josiah would reply, trading pelts for salt, flour, ammunition, and the few other things he couldn't make or grow himself. The trader would shake his head. Man wasn't meant to live alone like this. It ain't natural. Josiah never argued. Natural or not, it was his choice. Out here, there was no one to disappoint, no one to lose, no one to blame him when things went wrong. There was just the work of surviving, the rhythm of seasons, and the silence that had become more familiar than any human voice. He'd aged into the mountains. His hair had gone from brown to gray to mostly white. His hands were scarred from axe and knife, weathered by wind and cold. He'd lost 2 teeth to an abscess he'd dug out himself with whiskey and a small blade. His body was lean and hard, stripped of anything unnecessary. He could walk 20 miles in a day, climb slopes that would wind younger men, and read the signs of weather and wildlife better than most people. Could read print. The few trappers and hunters who occasionally crossed paths with him in the high country treated him like a legend, the ghost of the mountains, the hermit who'd outlasted everyone else foolish enough to try living this far from civilization. They told stories about him in the settlements, each tale growing with the telling. Some said he was a wanted man, hiding from the law. Others claimed he'd been a soldier who'd seen too much killing. A few whispered he was touched by madness, talking to spirits in the wind. Josiah heard these stories when Bridger gossiped, and he didn't bother correcting them. Let people think what they wanted. The truth was simpler and sadder than any legend. He was just a man who'd lost the one thing that made life worth sharing. Asterisk around his neck, on a leather cord worn soft with age, hung a silver ring, Sarah's ring. He never took it off. It rested against his chest, a constant weight, a reminder of why he was here. This particular winter had come early and hard. By November, snow lay 3 feet deep in the valley, and the peaks above were buried under drifts that wouldn't melt until May. Josiah had prepared, as he always did, wood stacked high under the lean-to, meat cured and hanging in the cold cellar. Enough supplies to last until spring, if he was careful. The blizzard arrived on a Tuesday in late November, rolling down from the north with the kind of cold that could kill an unprepared man in an hour. Josiah watched it come from his cabin window, reading the heavy gray-black clouds, the way the wind shifted and picked up, the sudden drop in temperature that made the trees crack like rifle shots. He'd secured everything by noonbroad in extra firewood, checked the shutters, filled every container with water from the creek before it froze solid. By evening, the wind was howling like something alive and angry. driving snow horizontally across the clearing, reducing visibility to nothing. Josiah sat by the fire, mending a harness by lamplight, listening to the storm rage outside. This was the kind of night that reminded a man how small he was, how indifferent nature was to human plans and pride. He'd weathered dozens of storms like this, knew he'd weather dozens more if he lived long enough. He didn't expect to hear anything over the wind, didn't expect the knock-on, but it came faint, desperate, barely audible. 3 soft thuds against wood, then silence, then the heavy sound of something falling into snow. Josiah set down the harness and listened. The wind screamed and whistled through the eaves, making it hard to distinguish real sounds from the storm's tricks. He'd heard plenty of strange noises over the years, branches breaking under ice loads, animals seeking shelter, even the cabin itself settling and creaking in the cold. But this had been different, deliberate. Human. He stood slowly, moved to the door and pressed his ear against the wood. Nothing but wind. He waited, counting his breaths, giving whoever or whatever was out there a chance to knock again. Silence. Every instinct told him to leave the door barred. He'd survived 3 decades by keeping the world outside where it belonged. Opening that door meant letting something in, breaking the careful isolation he'd built. People brought complications, expectations, pain. He'd learned that lesson thoroughly. But the image wouldn't leave his mind. Someone out in this storm, desperate enough to seek help from a cabin that shouldn't exist, that most people believed was just another mountain legend. He unbarred the door. The wind hit him like a fist, driving snow into his face, stealing his breath. He had to lean into it to keep the door from slamming back against the wall. The temperature was brutal, well below zero. Cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. At first, he saw nothing but white chaos. Then his eyes adjusted, and he looked down. A woman lay crumpled in the snow at his doorstep, half buried already by the drifting powder. Her clothes were torn, her dark hair matted with ice. One hand was extended toward the door, frozen in the act of reaching. The other clutched something red, a scarf or a piece of fabric. Josiah didn't hesitate. He bent, got his arms under her, and lifted. She was lighter than he expected, her body cold as stone. He carried her inside, kicked the door shut against the wind, and laid her on the bearskin rug in front of the fire. Her lips were blue. Her skin was pale as death, with an ugly grayish tinge at her fingertips and cheekbones. Her breathing was so shallow he had to put his face close to her mouth to confirm. She was still alive. Hypothermia. Advanced stage. She had minutes, maybe less. Josiah's hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from decades of frontier living taking over. He'd treated frostbite and cold exposure before trappers who'd stayed out too long, a hunter who'd fallen through ice. The procedure was always the same. Warm the core first, slowly, carefully. Too fast and the shock could kill. He stripped off her wet clothes with clinical detachment, trying not to notice the fine quality of the fabric, the way her dress had once been expensive. Underneath, she wore a corset and chemise, both soaked through. Those came off too. He wrapped her in blankets, layering wool and fur, then positioned her close to the fire, but not too close. He'd had to return gradually. He heated water, not to boiling but warm enough. He soaked cloths and pressed them against her neck, her wrists, under her arms, the places where blood ran close to the surface. Her breathing deepened slightly, a good sign. While he worked, he studied her. Mid-20s, he guessed, though it was hard to tell with her face so pale and drawn. Dark hair that would probably be beautiful when clean and dry. Fine bone structure, delicate hands that had never done hard labor. This was not a frontier woman, not someone accustomed to mountain winters and survival. She wore no wedding ring, but there was a pale line on her left ring finger where one had been recently. Around her neck, barely visible beneath the blankets, was a thin gold chain with a small locket. He left it alone, as warmth slowly returned to her body, she began to mumble. Incoherent words at first, fragments that made no sense. Then names Mrs. Ashford and Clayton and something that sounded like, no, please, no. Her hands clenched and unclenched, fighting invisible threats. Josiah checked her extremities. Her fingers and toes were still dangerously cold, but the grayish color was fading. He massaged them gently, working circulation back into the tissue, watching for the telltale black patches that would indicate serious frostbite. She was lucky cold, yes, but she'd been found in time. He noticed other things as he worked. Bruises on her wrists, purple-yellow and several days old, in the pattern of finger marks. Someone had grabbed her, hard. There was a cut above her left temple, partially healed, the kind that came from a blow rather than an accident. And when he checked her feet, he found them blistered and raw, as if she'd been running for days in shoes never meant for wilderness travel. This woman hadn't just been caught in the storm. She'd been fleeing through it. The red fabric she'd been clutching fell from her loosened grip. Josiah picked it up a scarf, made of fine silk, the kind that cost more than most frontier families earned in a month. It was torn along one edge and stained with mud and what might have been blood. He turned it over in his hands, noting the embroidered initials in one corner. CA. He set the scarf aside and returned his attention to the woman. Her breathing was stronger now, more regular. Color was returning to her cheeks. She'd survive, barring complications. But that raised new questions. Who was she? What had driven her into the mountains in the middle of winter? And who had hurt her? Hours passed. Josiah maintained his vigil, checking her temperature, adjusting the blankets, keeping the fire fed. Outside, the storm continued its assault, wind rattling the shutters, snow piling against the walls. No one could travel in this. Whatever had been chasing her, if anything had, was trapped by the weather same as them. Near midnight, her eyes opened. She stared at the cabin ceiling for a long moment, confused and disoriented. Then her gaze found Josiah, sitting in his chair a few feet away, and her eyes went wide with fear. She tried to sit up, got tangled in the blankets, and fell back with a gasp. Easy, Josiah said, keeping his voice low and calm. You're safe. You collapsed outside my door. I brought you in. She looked around wildly, taking in the cabin, the fire, her situation. Her hands went to the blankets, realized she was naked beneath them, and she pulled them tighter around herself. Where am I? Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. My cabin, about 15 miles north of the nearest settlement, high in the mountains. There's a blizzard outside. Has been for hours. She processed this, fear gradually giving way to confusion. How did I get here? I was hoping you could tell me that. She shook her head, winced at the motion. I was walking. It was so cold. I saw a light your window, I think. I remember knocking. She paused, struggling with the memory. Then nothing. You've been unconscious for hours. You had severe hypothermia. Another few minutes, and you'd have died. The bluntness of his words made her flinch, but he saw no point in softening the truth. She'd come dangerously close to death, and she needed to understand that thought she was quiet for a moment. Then her eyes went to the window. Even through the shutters, the howl of the wind was audible. Her expression changed from confusion to something like panic. The storm, she said. How long will it last? Could be days. Could be a week. No way to know. Days? The panic intensified. She tried to sit up again. Managed it this time despite the dizziness that clearly hit her. I can't stay here that long. I have to keep moving. You're not moving anywhere. You can barely sit up, and there's a killing storm outside. You don't understand. Then help me understand. Josiah leaned forward slightly. Who are you? Why were you out in that storm? And who gave you those bruises? She pulled the blankets tighter, defensive. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Her eyes went to the window again, searching the darkness beyond as if expecting to see something or someone staring back. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and frightened. "My name is Beth, and I'm running from people who want to kill me." Josiah studied her face, reading the genuine terror there. He'd seen plenty of lies in his time, and this wasn't one. "Who?" "I can't tell you that. The less you know, the safer you are. If they're coming here, I need to know what I'm dealing with." She shook her head, adamant despite her weakness. "They won't come. Not in this storm. By the time the weather clears, I'll be gone. You'll be dead if you go back out there unprepared. Then I'll die running instead of waiting." Her jaw set with determination that didn't match her fragile appearance. "I won't let them take me. I won't go back." Josiah sat back, considering. This was exactly the kind of complication he'd spent 30 years avoiding. A woman in trouble, dangerous people possibly following, forced proximity in a cabin barely big enough for one. Everything about this situation went against the careful isolation he'd built. But she was here, and he'd already made the choice when he opened the door. "You need rest," he said finally. "Food, warmth, time to recover. We'll talk more when you're stronger." She looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. Her eyes were already drooping, her body demanding the sleep it needed to heal. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving me." Josiah didn't respond. He just added another log to the fire and settled into his chair to keep watch. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the woman Beth, if that was even her real name, fell into an uneasy sleep. Occasionally crying out or thrashing against nightmares, Josiah couldn't see Dot and around his neck. Sarah's ring felt heavier than it had in years. They heard the horses on the fourth morning. The storm had finally broken during the night, leaving behind a world transformed pristine white under a pale winter sun. The air so cold and clear it hurt to breathe. Josiah had been outside checking the drifts when he caught the sound. The distant crunch of hooves breaking through crusted snow. The jingle of tack, voices carrying in the still air. He moved back inside quickly, barring the door. "They're here," he said. Beth went pale. She'd been sitting by the fire, and now she stood on shaking legs. "How many?" "At least 3 riders, maybe more." He moved to the window, peering through a gap in the shutters. 3 men emerged from the tree line, sitting their horses cautiously, studying the cabin. They were dressed for hard travel, heavy coats, fur hats, rifles across their saddles. The kind of men who made their living tracking things that didn't want to be found. The lead rider was older, maybe 40, with a scar that ran from his left eye to his jaw. He raised a hand, signaling his companions to stop at the edge of the clearing. "That's Dalton," Beth whispered, standing beside Josiah at the window. "The man in front. He's the one who found me in Timber Creek." Josiah studied Dalton with the eye of someone who tracked hostile Indians across plains and through forests. The man moved with confidence, but not carelessness. Experienced, dangerous. Dalton called out, his voice carrying across the snow. "Hello, the cabin. We're looking for information. We mean no harm to anyone inside." Josiah remained silent, watching. "We're tracking a woman," Dalton continued. "Young, dark hair. Might have come through here a few days back. We're willing to pay for information." Beth gripped Josiah's arm. "Don't go out there, please." But Josiah had already made his decision. He couldn't hide inside and hope they'd leave. Men like this would investigate, search, and if they found evidence of Beth's presence, and they would. Given time, the situation would turn violent. Better to face them now. On his terms, he picked up his rifle, checked the load. "Stay away from the windows. If shooting starts, get to the cellar. Josiah, trust me." He unbarred the door and stepped outside, rifle held loosely but ready. The cold bit into his face, and the snow crunched under his boots. He walked a few paces from the cabin, putting himself between the riders and the door. "State your business," he said. Dalton studied him with interest. "You live here alone?" "I do. Long way from anywhere. That's the point." One of the other riders, younger and meaner looking, spoke up. "We heard rumors about a hermit up here. Thought it was just talk." Josiah ignored him, kept his attention on Dalton. "You're looking for someone. A woman. Elizabeth Hartwell." Dalton pulled a folded paper from his coat, held it up. "Wanted for theft and assault back east. There's a reward." "I haven't seen anyone." "You sure about that?" Dalton's eyes narrowed. "Storm like we just had. Someone could have gotten lost up here. Might have sought shelter. I've been alone all winter. If someone came through, I didn't see them." The third rider, a broad-shouldered man with a thick beard, nudged his horse forward. "Mind if we look around?" "I mind." Josiah's voice was flat. Final. Dalton raised a hand, stopping his companion. "Now, friend, we don't want trouble. But this woman is dangerous. She's wanted by some powerful people. People who don't take kindly to folks who get in their way. Then those powerful people should stay off my mountain." "Your mountain?" The bearded man laughed. "You got a deed that says that?" "I've got 30 years of living here. That's deed enough." Dalton leaned forward in his saddle. "We're being polite because that's how civilized men do business. But make no mistake, we will search this cabin. We can do it with your cooperation or without it. Your choice." Josiah's hand shifted slightly on his rifle. "You're welcome to try." The tension ratcheted up. The three riders tensed, hands moving toward weapons. Josiah stood perfectly still, a man carved from the same granite as the mountains around him. Then a new voice cut through the standoff. "Dalton, I think we should listen to the man." A fourth rider emerged from the trees, younger than the others, maybe late 20s, wearing a deputy's badge on his coat. He rode forward slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. "Marshal Garrett sent me ahead to keep this peaceful," the deputy said. "Name's Cooper. Tom Cooper." Josiah evaluated him. The deputy had honest eyes, and he looked uncomfortable with the situation. Dalton glared at Cooper. "We have a job to do, and we'll do it legal," Cooper replied. He turned to Josiah. "Sir, I apologize for the intrusion, but we do need to determine if Miss Hartwell came through here. The warrant is legitimate, signed by a territorial judge." "Based on lies," Josiah said quietly. Cooper's eyebrows rose. "You know something about this case? I know powerful men can buy any warrant they want. I know a woman running for her life looks different from a criminal on the run. So you have seen her." Josiah didn't answer, which was answer enough. Dalton smiled cold and predatory. "There it is. She's inside, isn't she?" "I said I've been alone all winter." "You also just admitted you know she's innocent." Dalton dismounted, his companions following suit. "We're going in that cabin." Josiah raised his rifle slightly. "No, you're not." The bearded man laughed again. "Old man, there's 3 of us and 1 of you. 4, counting the deputy. You really want to die over some woman you don't even know? I've lived through worse odds." Something in Josiah's voice, absolute certainty, made them hesitate. This wasn't bravado. This was a man stating simple fact. Cooper stepped between them. "Everyone needs to calm down. Mr. I didn't catch your name." "Crane. Josiah Crane." "Mr. Crane, I understand your position. But if Miss Hartwell is inside, she needs to answer to these charges. If she's innocent like you say, that'll come out in court. Will it?" Josiah met the deputy's eyes. "You believe that? You think a servant girl gets justice against a railroad magnate?" Cooper's expression flickered doubt, recognition of an ugly truth. "I think," Cooper said slowly, "that the law is supposed to protect everyone equally. And I'd like to believe that's still possible." "Young men have a lot of faith and should be and supposed to," Josiah said. "Old men no different." Dalton had heard enough. Cooper, you can play at being righteous later. We're taking the woman now. He started toward the cabin. Josiah's rifle came up, aimed at Dalton's chest. One more step, Josiah said quietly, and I drop you where you stand. Dalton stopped. For a long moment, no one moved. The mountain wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere distant, a raven called Dot. Then Dalton smiled. You'd shoot me? A man just doing his job? If your job involves hurting an innocent woman, yes. She's not innocent. She's a thief and a liar. Dalton's hand moved toward his gun. And you're harboring a fugitive. That makes you a criminal too. Then I guess I'm a criminal. The situation balanced on a knife's edge. 4 armed men facing one. But that one man stood his ground with the kind of calm that came from having nothing left to lose. Deputy. Cooper broke the stalemate. Dalton, stand down. We're not having a shootout over this. The marshal said, the marshal isn't here. I am, and I'm telling you to stand down. Dalton's jaw clenched. You're making a mistake, Deputy. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. Slowly, reluctantly, Dalton stepped back. But his eyes never left Josiah, and the promise in them was clear. This wasn't over. We'll be back, Dalton said, with the marshal and more men. And when we come, Mr. Crane, you won't have a choice. I'll be here. Asterisk, the 3 bounty hunters mounted their horses. Dalton looked back once more. You're protecting a murderess. That's what she is now, not just a thief. Ashford's wife died 2 days after this woman ran, murdered in her bed. So when you're feeling noble, remember that. The words hit like a physical blow. Josiah's expression didn't change, but inside, something twisted. The riders disappeared into the trees, leaving only hoofprints in the snow. Deputy Cooper lingered a moment longer. I meant what I said about the law protecting everyone. I hope that's true. But Mr. Crane, you should know that Garrett is bringing 6 more men. They'll be here in maybe 2 days. When they come, it won't be questions and conversation. It'll be force. Thanks for the warning. Cooper nodded and rode away, following the others. Josiah stood alone in the clearing for a long time, feeling the weight of what he'd just committed to. Then he turned and went back inside. Beth was pressed against the wall, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Ashford is dead, she whispered. Oh God, he killed her too. Beth's grief was a living thing, filling the cabin with her sobs. She'd collapsed to her knees, the red scarf clutched in her hands. Josiah stood over her, uncertain. He'd spent 3 decades avoiding this kind of raw emotion, this proximity to another person's pain. But he couldn't leave her there. He knelt beside her, awkward but sincere. It's not your fault. She's dead because of me. Because I tried to help her. Because I saw what he did. Her voice broke. She was the only person who showed me kindness in that house. The only one who treated me like I mattered. Ashford killed her. Not you. He's responsible, no one else. She looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. Does that make it hurt less? No, Josiah admitted. It doesn't. But the truth still matters. He helped her to her feet, guided her to the chair by the fire. She sat hunched over, the scarf pressed to her face, breathing in whatever trace of Mrs. Ashford might still linger on the fabric. Josiah moved to the window, scanning the tree line. The riders were gone, but they'd be back. Cooper's warning was clear. 2 days, maybe less. He needed to prepare, to plan. But first, he needed to understand something. That deputy, he said. Cooper. He seemed different from the others. Beth wiped her eyes. He's young. Still believes in justice. Do you? She was quiet for a long moment. I used to. When I was younger, I thought the world worked a certain way. That good people were rewarded and bad people were punished. Then I watched Mrs. Ashford suffer for years in a marriage that was slowly killing her. I watched her husband become richer and more powerful while she became a ghost in her own house. And now she's dead, and he's still free. She looked at Josiah. So no, I don't believe in justice anymore. But you kept that journal. You documented what happened. Why bother if you don't think justice exists? She considered the question. Hope, maybe. Or stubbornness. The idea that someday, somehow, the truth would matter. Josiah moved to the trunk where he kept items he rarely touched. He unlocked it and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. When he unwrapped it, Beth saw a small golden locket on a delicate chain. This was Sarah's, he said, holding it carefully. Her mother gave it to her when she was 16. He opened the locket. Inside was a miniature portrait of a young woman, honey-colored hair, kind eyes, a gentle smile that suggested warmth and optimism. Beth stood and came closer, studying the portrait. She was beautiful. She was more than that. She was... Josiah struggled for words. She saw the best in people, always, even when they didn't deserve it, even when it hurt her, like me with Mrs. Ashford, maybe. He closed the locket gently. After she died, people in our town blamed me. Said I should have gotten the doctor sooner, done more, tried harder. Said her death was my failure. That's not fair. Fair doesn't enter into it. They needed someone to blame, and I was convenient. Sarah's father especially, he couldn't accept that sometimes bad things just happen. That fever doesn't care about love or intentions. Is that why you left? Part of it. But mostly I left because staying meant facing what I'd lost every single day. Every street corner reminded me of her. Every person who looked at me with pity or judgment. I couldn't breathe there anymore. He turned the locket over in his hands, feeling the weight of 30 years. I thought running would make it stop hurting, he continued. Thought distance would equal healing. But pain doesn't work like that. You carry it wherever you go. Beth understood. She'd been running too, in her own way. Why are you showing me this? She asked softly. Because you need to know something. He met her eyes. Sarah believed people were worth saving. That helping others, even when it cost you, was the only thing that made life mean something. I buried that belief with her. Told myself it was foolish, that caring led to nothing but hurt. But you saved me. I did. And now we're both in danger because of it. Those men will come back with more guns, more determination. They'll burn this cabin down if they have to. He paused. And I still don't regret opening that door. Beth felt tears threaten again, but different ones. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you tried to help a woman escape a terrible situation. I know you witnessed a murder and refused to stay silent. I know you're brave enough to keep running, even when it would be easier to give up. He placed the locket back in the trunk carefully. Maybe that's worth fighting for. Fighting. You mean staying here, defending this cabin against however many men they bring. Unless you have a better idea. She shook her head slowly. I told you, I can't go to the law. Ashford owns them. I can't run forever. Eventually, they'll catch me. She looked around the cabin. At least here, I'm not alone. Something passed between them, an understanding. A choice made by both of them. Whatever came next, they would face it together. That night, Josiah showed Beth something he'd never shown anyone. The hidden cellar beneath the cabin. He pulled aside a rug and revealed a trapdoor concealed in the floorboards. Below was a space he'd dug out himself, reinforced with timber, stocked with supplies. How long have you had this? Beth asked, peering down into the darkness. Since I built the cabin. Old habits from my scouting days. Always have a fallback position. The cellar contained more than just food and water. There were weapons, rifles, pistols, ammunition, medical supplies. Even a small escape tunnel that led out to the tree line behind the cabin. You've been preparing for war, Beth said. I've been preparing to survive. Sometimes they're the same thing. They spent the evening organizing, planning, preparing defenses. Josiah taught Beth how to properly load and fire a rifle, how to aim despite fear, how to think tactically. She was a quick learner, focused and determined. As midnight approached, they sat together by the dying fire. The cabin was quiet except for the occasional pop and hiss of embers. "Tell me about her," Beth said. "About Sarah, not about how she died. Tell me how she lived." So Josiah did. For the first time in 30 years, he talked about Sarah, really talked about her. The way she laughed, the songs she sang, her habit of reading aloud even when no one was listening. The garden she'd planned, the children she'd imagined, the life she'd wanted. And Beth listened, honoring a woman she'd never met, understanding what she meant to the man sitting beside her. When Josiah finally finished, Beth spoke quietly. "She would have liked what you're doing, helping me." "Maybe," Josiah said. "Or maybe she'd say I'm being a fool." "No, I think she'd say you're being who you always were, who you forgot you could be." Outside, the night deepened, and in the distance, too far to hear yet, more riders were coming. On the 4th day of the siege, a lone rider appeared on the trail from the south. Not one of Dalton's men. This rider was smaller, younger, wearing a badge that caught the morning sunlight. Josiah watched through the window as Dalton intercepted the newcomer at the tree line. There was a brief conference, papers exchanged, then Dalton gestured toward the cabin. The young rider, a deputy by the look of him, nodded and urged his horse forward into the clearing. "Someone's coming," Josiah said. Alone, wearing a badge. Beth moved to the window, looked out, and her face went even paler than usual. "They made it official. They've charged me with something, gotten a warrant." The deputy stopped his horse 20 feet from the cabin and called out, "Hello in there. I'm Deputy Marshal James Wheeler from the Territorial Office. I need to speak with whoever's inside." Josiah made a decision. He cracked the door open, rifle visible but not aimed. "I'm listening." Wheeler was young, maybe 25, with an earnest face that hadn't yet learned to hide what he was thinking. He held up his hands, showing they were empty. "Sir, I have a warrant here for the arrest of Elizabeth Hartwell. I'm authorized to take her into custody and return her to Denver for trial." "Trial for what?" "Murder, theft, and conspiracy." Wheeler's voice was steady, but his eyes were uncomfortable. "Clayton Ashford filed charges 3 days ago. His wife, Margaret Ashford, was found dead near Pine Ridge. Evidence suggests Miss Hartwell was involved." Beth made a small sound behind Josiah, quickly stifled. He kept his face neutral. "What evidence?" "According to the complaint, Mrs. Ashford's jewelry was found in Miss Hartwell's possession when she fled the Ashford household, and a witness places her at the scene where Mrs. Ashford's body was discovered." "That's a lie," Beth called out from inside the cabin. "All of it." Wheeler shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Ma'am, that's for a court to decide. I'm just here to bring you in." Josiah studied the young deputy's face, reading the doubt there. "You believe Ashford's story?" "It's not my job to believe or disbelieve. It's my job to execute warrants. But you have doubts." Wheeler hesitated, then admitted, "The timing is suspicious. Ashford waited 3 weeks to report his wife's death and file charges. When I asked why, he said he'd been searching for Miss Hartwell himself. Didn't realize she'd witnessed his wife's murder until recently." He paused. "It doesn't sit right, but I'm not a judge. I'm just a deputy following orders." Asterisk Josiah respected the honesty. "What happens if I don't hand her over?" "Then I have to report that you're obstructing justice. More men will come with more authority. And you'll be arrested, too." Wheeler looked genuinely pained. "Sir, I don't want this to go that way. From what Dalton tells me, you're just someone who gave shelter to a woman in a storm. You didn't know she was wanted. You can walk away from this clean. And if she's innocent, then she have her day in court. Court in Denver, where Ashford owns the judge and half the jury. Wheeler's jaw tightened. He couldn't deny it, and they both knew it. Finally, he said, "I'll give you 1 hour to consider. After that, I have to do my duty." He wheeled his horse and rode back toward the tree line, leaving Josiah and Beth alone with their impossible choices. Beth collapsed into the chair, her face in her hands. "It's over. They've made me a murderer. No one will believe me now." Josiah barred the door and paced, thinking furiously. A murder warrant changed everything. Even if they escaped Dalton, Beth would be hunted across the territory. And he'd be wanted too, for harboring a fugitive. "There's something wrong with the timeline," he said slowly. "Wheeler said Ashford filed charges 3 days ago. But you said Margaret died 3 weeks ago, shortly after you separated." "That's right. So why wait 3 weeks to report it? Why file charges now?" Beth looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "Because he needed time. Time to create evidence, to build a case, to make sure his story was airtight. Which means he killed her recently. Within the last few days." Josiah's mind raced through the implications. "He let you run, let you think you'd escaped. Then he killed Margaret, staged it to look like you were responsible, and only then filed charges. But why? Why not just kill us both in Denver?" "Because Margaret was his wife. Her death would be investigated. Questions would be asked. This way, he has a perfect scapegoat, the missing maid who fled after the murder. All the evidence points to you, and he looks like the grieving husband seeking justice." Beth stood, pacing now too. "But if that's true, if Margaret only died recently, there might be proof. Someone who saw her alive after I left Denver. Something that breaks his timeline. Do you know anyone who would have seen her? Anyone she might have contacted in Pine Ridge?" Beth thought hard. She mentioned a church. Said there was a pastor there who helped women in difficult situations. Father Morrison, I think. She was going to reach out to him. If she did, if he can testify that he saw her alive after you left, it breaks Ashford's whole story. Proves he's lying. They looked at each other, possibility and hope warring with the reality of their situation. They were trapped in a cabin, surrounded by armed men, with a warrant out for Beth's arrest. Even if they could prove her innocence, they'd have to survive long enough to present that proof. Josiah made a decision. "I'm going to talk to Wheeler again, alone." "Josiah, no. He's the only one out there who seems to have any conscience. If I can convince him to carry a message, to investigate on his own, Ashford will have him killed or bought off before he can do anything. Maybe, but it's the only chance we have." He checked his rifle, then paused at the door. "There's something else, something I need to tell you." Beth waited. "I have a brother, Thomas. He's a federal judge in Denver. We haven't spoken in 28 years, not since I disappeared up here. The admission cost him, but it needed to be said. If Wheeler can get a message to Thomas, if he's willing to investigate Ashford independently, Thomas has the authority to subpoena records, to question witnesses, to challenge the warrant." "Your brother," Beth repeated, understanding dawning. "That's why you really left. It wasn't just Sarah. There was family you abandoned." "Yes." "And you'd reach out to him now?" "For me?" Josiah met her eyes. "For justice. For the truth. And yes, for you." She crossed to him, took his hand in both of hers. "Thank you." He squeezed once, then released her hand and stepped outside. Wheeler was waiting at the edge of the clearing, clearly unhappy about the whole situation. When he saw Josiah approach alone, he tensed but didn't draw his weapon. "You've made your decision?" Wheeler asked. "I have. But first, I need you to hear the truth." Josiah laid out everything Beth had told him, the murder she witnessed, Margaret's plan to escape, the separation in Pine Ridge, the suspicious timeline of Ashford's charges. He spoke clearly, factually, without embellishment. Wheeler listened, his face growing more troubled with each detail. "Even if that's all true," he said finally. I still have a warrant. I still have orders. I know. But you also have a conscience, and I can see it's bothering you. Josiah pulled out a piece of paper from his pocket, a letter he'd written while Beth slept the night before. This is addressed to Federal Judge Thomas Crane in Denver. He's my brother. He'll investigate if you can get this to him. Wheeler took the letter, studied it. Judge Crane is your brother? The one who prosecuted 3 territorial officials for corruption last year. Yes, he doesn't take bribes. And he doesn't look the other way when powerful men abuse the law. But if Ashford finds out I'm investigating him, then be careful. Be smart, but be just. Josiah held the deputy's gaze. You took an oath. Not to Clayton Ashford. Not to men like Dalton. To the law. To justice. This is your chance to live up to that oath. Wheeler was silent for a long time, weighing the letter in his hands, weighing his conscience against his career. Finally, he nodded. I'll deliver it. Then I'll poke around Pine Ridge, see if anyone saw Mrs. Ashford alive recently. He looked toward the tree line where Dalton waited. But I can't stop them. The warrant is valid until proven otherwise. Even if I leave, Dalton has orders to bring Miss Hartwell in, dead or alive. How many men does he have coming? 6 more. Territorial Marshal and his deputies, due to arrive tomorrow or the day after. Then we have 1 day. Wheeler tucked the letter into his coat. 1 day. Use it well. He paused. For what it's worth, I hope you're right. I hope she's innocent. But if she's not, she is. Wheeler nodded and rode out, passing Dalton with a brief exchange of words. Dalton watched him go, then turned his attention back to the cabin, his scarred face expressionless. When Josiah returned inside, Beth was at the window. What did he say? He'll deliver the message. He'll investigate. But reinforcements are coming tomorrow. Josiah began checking their ammunition stores, their water supply. We need to be ready to move if Thomas can't act fast enough. Where would we go? North, into the high peaks where horses can't follow easily. There are caves, shelters, I know. We could hide for weeks if necessary. Wait for Thomas to clear your name. Beth helped him prepare, but her movements were mechanical, her face distant. Finally, she spoke. You said you hadn't talked to your brother in 28 years. What if he doesn't believe you? What if he won't help? It was the question Josiah had been avoiding. Thomas had every reason to refuse. The abandoned family, the decades of silence, the sudden request for help. They'd been close once as children, but that was a lifetime ago. Then we run, he said simply. And we keep running until we find someone who will listen. That night, they didn't sleep. They sat together by the fire, weapons close, listening to the silence of the mountains and the distant sounds of Dalton's camp. Tomorrow would bring more men, more danger, and possibly their last chance at proving the truth. But tonight, for these few hours, they had shelter and each other's company. And for Josiah, that was more than he'd had in 30 years. Dawn came too quickly. Josiah had been watching the eastern sky lighten, counting down the hours until Dalton's reinforcements would arrive. Beth sat beside him now, her rifle across her lap, her face set with determination that couldn't quite hide her fear. Tell me about your brother, she said quietly. What's he like? Josiah considered the question. Younger than me by 4 years. Smarter, always was. While I was learning to track and hunt, he had his nose in law books. Our father used to joke that Thomas would either be a lawyer or a preacher, and either way he taught people into doing the right thing. You were close? Once, when we were boys, yes. I taught him to ride, to shoot, to read the weather. He taught me. Josiah paused, surprised by the memory. He taught me to read properly. Not just signs and maps, but books, poetry sometimes. He said a man needed more than survival skills to be whole. What happened between you? Sarah happened. Or rather, losing her happened. Thomas tried to help, tried to pull me back from the edge. He wrote letters, visited, argued that running away wouldn't heal anything. I didn't listen. One day, I just left. Didn't say goodbye, didn't leave word where I was going. Just disappeared. Beth was quiet for a moment. He must have been hurt. I'm sure he was. But I was too buried in my own pain to care about anyone else's. Josiah's voice was rough with old regret. I told myself it was better that way. Cleaner. He could move on without worrying about his broken older brother. Except he kept writing. You said you had letters. For 15 years, he wrote. Every few months, a letter would arrive with Bridger. News about his life, his law practice, his wife and children. Questions about whether I was all right. Invitations to come home. Josiah rubbed his face wearily. I never opened them. Not one. Just kept them in that tin box. Told myself I'd read them someday when it hurt less. But it never hurt less. Why did you keep them if you weren't going to read them? It was a fair question. Josiah had asked himself the same thing many times. Because throwing them away would have meant giving up completely. As long as I kept them, there was still a possibility. Someday, maybe, I could... He didn't finish the sentence. Beth reached over and took his hand, squeezed it gently. Now is someday, she said. Whatever happens today, you reached out. That took courage. Before Josiah could respond, movement at the tree line caught his eye. More riders were approaching 6 men, as Wheeler had predicted. The territorial marshal was easy to identify, older and harder looking than the others, riding at the head of the group. They joined Dalton's camp, horses tied, men conferring in low voices. They're here, Beth said unnecessarily. Josiah counted weapons, assessed positions, calculated angles. 9 men total now, all armed, all presumably willing to use force. Against 2 defenders in a wooden cabin with limited ammunition and no hope of immediate reinforcement. The odds were not good. Marshal Garrett detached from the group and rode forward, stopping at the same spot Wheeler had used. He was a hard-faced man in his 50s, with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much and cared about too little. I'm Marshal William Garrett, he called out. I'm here for Elizabeth Hartwell. You have until noon to surrender her peacefully. After that, we come in and take her. Josiah didn't respond. There was nothing to say that would change the situation. Garrett waited a moment, then added, Clayton Ashford is offering a reward for her safe return. $5,000. That's more money than you'll see in a lifetime up here. Hand her over, collect the reward, go back to your quiet life. Everyone wins. Except me, Beth muttered. I'd be dead before we reached Denver. Josiah knew she was right. Ashford wanted her silenced, not tried. The reward was for her body, not her testimony. We're not coming out, Josiah called back. And you're not coming in. Garrett's expression didn't change. Then you're both guilty of obstruction and harboring a fugitive. That makes you enemies of the law. Think carefully about whether you want to die for a woman you barely know. The marshal wheeled his horse and returned to his men. Josiah watched as they spread out, taking positions that surrounded the cabin on 3 sides. The 4th side, facing north toward the steep mountain slopes, they left open. It was too steep, too dangerous for a retreat route. Or so they thought. They're going to wait until noon, then attack, Beth said. Try to overwhelm us. That's what I'd do in their position. Josiah began moving supplies toward the trapdoor that led to the cellar. But we're not going to be here when they do. Beth looked confused. What do you mean? That northern slope they're not covering? There's a game trail that runs along it, hidden by rocks and scrub. It's narrow and dangerous, but I've used it before. We can get to it through a drainage tunnel that connects to the cellar. A tunnel? Built it my 3rd year here, after a particularly bad winter. Emergency exit in case the cabin ever caught fire or got snowed in. Never had to use it, but I've kept it clear. He began lowering packs through the trapdoor. We go out through the tunnel, work our way up the game trail while they're focused on the cabin. By the time they realize we're gone, we'll be in the high country where horses can't follow. And then what? Then we find one of the shelters I told you about, and we wait for Thomas to clear your name. Could be days, could be weeks, but we'll be alive. Beth helped him pack ammunition, dried food, blankets, medical supplies, flint and steel for fire. Everything needed to survive in the mountains, stripped down to bare essentials. They worked quickly and quietly, aware that time was running short as they prepared. Josiah found himself studying Beth, the way she moved with purpose now. No longer the half-frozen woman who'd collapsed at his door. She'd grown stronger, more capable, more confident. The fear was still there, but it no longer paralyzed her. "You'll do fine up there," he said. "In the high country, it's hard living, but you've got what it takes. I have a good teacher." They shared a brief smile, a moment of connection amid the tension. Then Josiah grew serious. "If we get separated up there, if something happens to me, you keep heading north. 3 days hard travel, you'll hit a trapper's line cabin. Man named Jensen uses it in fall. The door's never locked, and there's always supplies. You wait there. Someone will come eventually. Nothing's going to happen to you. But if it does, nothing is going to happen to you," Beth repeated firmly. "We're getting through this together, or not at all. I didn't survive 3 weeks of running just to lose you now." The words hung between them, weighted with more meaning than the surface allowed. Josiah found himself without a response, caught off guard by the emotion in her voice. A gunshot cracked across the clearing, a warning not aimed at the cabin. Garrett was getting impatient. "Time to go," Josiah said. They descended into the cellar, pulling the trapdoor closed above them. The space was dark and cold, smelling of earth and stored food. Josiah lit a small lamp and led the way to the back wall, where he'd concealed the tunnel entrance behind stacked barrels. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough to crawl through, reinforced with timber and stone. It sloped downward at first, following the natural drainage, then gradually angled back up toward the surface. It was perhaps 50 yards long, emerging in a cluster of boulders 100 feet up the northern slope. "You first," Josiah said. "I'll cover our tracks and seal the entrance behind us." Beth didn't argue. She shouldered her pack, took the lamp, and started crawling. Josiah waited until she was well ahead, then gathered loose dirt and scattered it across the cellar floor, obscuring their footprints. He repositioned the barrels to hide the tunnel entrance, then followed Beth into the darkness. The crawl was claustrophobic and difficult, made worse by the packs they carried. Josiah could hear Beth ahead of him, breathing hard but moving steadily. Roots hung from the tunnel ceiling, earth occasionally trickling down. It felt like the mountain was pressing in from all sides. After what seemed like hours, but was probably only minutes, Josiah saw daylight ahead. Beth had reached the exit. He helped push her pack out ahead of her, then emerged himself into the cold morning air, immediately pulling brush across the tunnel, opening to disguise it. They were on a steep slope, hidden among boulders and stunted pine. Below, through gaps in the trees, they could see the cabin and the men surrounding it. Above, the mountain rose in a series of rocky shelves and snowfields, leading up into the high peaks. Beth was already moving, picking her way carefully along the game trail. Josiah followed, pausing periodically to check behind them, making sure they weren't being followed. The trail was treacherous, narrow, icy in places, with drops that would kill if you slipped. But it was their best chance. They'd climbed perhaps a quarter mile when Josiah heard shouting below. He risked a glance back and saw men at the cabin door, battering it open. They decided not to wait until noon after all. "Keep moving," he told Beth. "Don't look back." They pushed harder, ignoring the burn in their legs, the thinning air, the bite of cold wind. Behind them, more shouts. Someone had discovered the cabin was empty, was searching the cellar. It wouldn't take long before they found the tunnel. But by then, Josiah and Beth were high on the mountain, moving through terrain. These hired guns from the low country would struggle to navigate as they paused for breath beside a snowbank. Beth looked at Josiah and managed a weary smile. "Still think I can't keep up with you?" Despite everything, he found himself smiling back. "You're doing better than I expected." "Good, because we're not done yet." Below, tiny in the distance, men were emerging from behind the cabin, pointing up the slope. They'd found the trail, and now the real chase would begin. The reunion between the brothers drew out slowly, words tumbling over each other as 28 years of silence tried to compress into moments. Thomas introduced Beth formally, shook her hand with the respect due an innocent woman who'd been grievously wronged. Then he explained the full situation. Cooper had indeed sent telegrams to Denver. But what he didn't know was that Ashford's butler, a man named Edmund Price, had already contacted Thomas's office days earlier. Price had witnessed too much, carried too much guilt. When he heard Mrs. Ashford had been killed and blame placed on Beth, his conscience broke. "Price gave us everything," Thomas said as they gathered in what remained of Josiah's cabin. Dates, times, witnesses to the embezzlement. He saw Ashford kill Webb through a keyhole, and he was in the house when Ashford smothered Mrs. Ashford in her sleep 2 days after Miss Hartwell fled. Beth sat with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee one of the federal marshals had provided. "Mrs. Ashford, she was still alive when I left. I saw her. She told me to run, to save myself." Price confirmed that, Thomas assured her. "He said Mrs. Ashford helped you escape, and Ashford killed her for it. Where is he now?" "Federal prison in Denver." He tried to use his connections, called in favors from every politician and judge he bought over the years. But murder is murder, and we have witnesses, documentation, evidence. Thomas's expression was grim but satisfied. "He'll hang within the month." Josiah had been standing at the window, looking out at the federal marshals processing Garrett and his men. The territorial marshal had gone quietly once he understood the scope of what he'd been involved in. Dalton and 2 others were in chains, facing their own charges of attempted murder and conspiracy. "What happens to Beth now?" Josiah asked. "Miss Hartwell is completely exonerated," Thomas said. "The territorial warrant has been voided. She's free to go wherever she chooses." He looked at Beth kindly. "Though I'd recommend staying away from railroad magnates for a while." Beth managed a weak smile. "I think I can manage that." Thomas turned to his brother. "And you, Josiah? What happens now? You can't stay in this cabin through another winter. It's barely standing as it is." Josiah looked around at the home he'd built, the sanctuary that had protected him for 3 decades. The walls were scarred from the standoff, the door damaged, shutters broken. But more than physical destruction, something had fundamentally changed. This place had been about isolation, about hiding from a world that had hurt him. He couldn't go back to that. Not after Beth. Not after remembering what it meant to connect with another person. "I don't know," he admitted. "This has been home for so long." "Then come to Denver," Thomas said. "Stay with me while you figure things out. Meet your nieces and nephews. Let me show you the life you've been missing." Josiah looked at Beth. She met his eyes, and something unspoken passed between them. A question, an answer, a possibility. "What about you?" Josiah asked her. "Where will you go?" "I don't know either. I have no family, no home. Mrs. Ashford left me some money in her will. Price mentioned that. But money isn't the same as belonging somewhere." Thomas watched the exchange between them with the knowing look of someone who recognized what was developing. "You're both welcome in Denver. My home is large, and frankly, it's been too quiet since Margaret passed." Before either could respond, Deputy Cooper approached, clearing his throat apologetically. "Judge Crane?" We've secured all the prisoners, but there's something you should know. What is it? Cooper glanced at Josiah, uncomfortable. Dalton's been talking. Says he has information about other jobs Ashford commissioned. Other people he had killed or silenced over the years. He's willing to testify if it means a reduced sentence. Thomas's eyes hardened. How many others? He claims at least 4, maybe more. Beth closed her eyes, grief washing over her again. Mrs. Ashford hadn't been the first. Maybe not even the second or third. Ashford had been killing to protect his interests for years, and no one had stopped him because no one with power had cared enough to look Dot until now. Get Dalton's testimony, Thomas ordered. Everything he knows. We'll use it to ensure Ashford has no chance of appeal, no avenue of escape. Cooper nodded and left. In the silence that followed, Beth spoke quietly. All those people. Dead because one man wanted money and power. But he's caught now, Josiah said, because you were brave enough to run, to survive, to keep that journal. You stopped him. We stopped him, Beth corrected. I would have died in that blizzard if you hadn't opened your door. Thomas observed his brother carefully. You've changed, Josiah. The man who left Virginia wouldn't have risked himself for a stranger. Maybe I'm tired of being that man, Josiah replied. Good, because that man was running from life. And I think you're finally ready to run toward it instead. Josiah touched the silver ring he still wore around his neck. Sarah's ring. It had been a symbol of loss, of a life that could have been. But maybe it could also be a symbol of the capacity to love, to connect, to risk heartbreak again because the alternative was a living death. He looked at Beth, saw her watching him with eyes that held hope and uncertainty in equal measure. Denver, he said slowly. We should go to Denver. Beth's face brightened. Together? If you'll have an old mountain man's company on the journey. She smiled a real smile, the first one he'd seen from her that reached her eyes. I think I can manage that. They spent that day preparing to leave. Thomas and his federal marshals would escort them to Denver, both for safety and because there was still paperwork to complete. Depositions to record, legal proceedings to initiate. Josiah moved through his cabin, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. 3 decades of possessions, most of them purely functional. But there were a few items that mattered. The carved rabbit, Sarah's locket, the tin box of letters from Thomas, and the Bible from the cellar, the one Sarah had given him with her inscription. Beth helped him pack, though she had little of her own to bring. Her clothes were still damaged from the blizzard, so Thomas's marshals had brought spare garments from the settlement. She wore a simple wool dress now, practical and warm, her dark hair pinned up properly for the first time since she'd arrived. You look different, Josiah observed. Different how? Less frightened. More yourself. She considered this. I feel different. Like I've been holding my breath for weeks and can finally exhale. They worked in comfortable silence, occasionally interrupted by Thomas checking in or Cooper asking questions for his report. The deputy had proven himself during the crisis, and Thomas was recommending him for a position with the federal marshals. Cooper was young, but he had integrity, a rare quality. Late afternoon, Beth found Josiah in the sleeping loft, staring at something in his hands. She climbed the ladder to join him. He was holding the silver ring, turning it over in his fingers. I've worn this for 30 years, he said quietly. Part of me wonders if taking it off means forgetting her. Beth sat beside him. I don't think you could forget her if you tried. And I don't think you should. But if I'm moving forward, if we're... He struggled with the words. Sarah was your first love, Beth said gently. That doesn't diminish what might come after. It's part of who you are, part of what makes you capable of loving at all. You don't mind? That I'll always carry her with me? Mind? Beth touched the red scarf she'd folded carefully in her own small pack. I'm carrying Mrs. Ashford with me. The memory of her kindness, her strength, her sacrifice. We're both shaped by the people we've lost. That's not a weakness. It's proof that we love deeply enough to be changed by it. Josiah looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just the frightened woman who'd collapsed at his door, but someone strong, compassionate, and wise beyond her years. Someone who understood grief because she'd lived it too. "I want to try," he said, "building something new. With you. If that's what you want." "It is," she said simply. "Though I should warn you, I'm not easy to live with. I have nightmares. I wake up expecting danger. It'll take time for me to believe I'm really safe. I have nightmares too, and I've forgotten how to live around other people. We'll figure it out together." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat like that for a while. Two damaged people finding comfort in each other's presence. That evening, Thomas organized a modest meal, nothing fancy. Just food his marshals had brought, shared around a campfire outside the cabin. It felt almost festive, despite everything that had happened. Men who'd been ready to kill each other that morning now sat in separate groups. The crisis resolved, justice beginning its slow work. Thomas raised a cup in toast. "To family," he said, looking at Josiah. "Lost and found." "To family," Josiah echoed. The words strange in his mouth after so long. Beth added quietly, "And to the people who teach us that it's never too late to come home." They drank, and around them, the mountains settled into evening. The sun painted the snow in shades of gold and rose, the temperature dropping rapidly as night approached. Asterisk Cooper approached their fire, respectful. "Judge Crane? We should probably leave at first light tomorrow. The weather's holding, but that might not last." "Agreed," Thomas said. He looked at Josiah. "One last night in your cabin. Are you ready for that?" Josiah thought about all the nights he'd spent here, alone with his memories and regrets. All the years of self-imposed exile, of believing that isolation was the same as peace. He'd been wrong about so much. "I'm ready," he said. That night, Josiah and Beth sat together in the cabin one final time. The fire burned low, casting long shadows. Outside, the federal marshals kept watch, but inside, there was only the two of them and the ghosts of their respective pasts. "Tell me about Denver," Beth said. "What's it like? I don't know," Josiah admitted. "I've never been. It didn't exist when I left civilization. Then we'll discover it together." He smiled at that, the idea of discovery, of newness, of future instead of past. "Yes, together." She took his hand, and he let her. This simple gesture of connection felt monumental after so long alone. Her fingers were smaller than his, softer, but there was strength in her grip. Survivor's strength. "Thank you," she said, "for opening that door. Thank you for knocking." They sat in comfortable silence as the fire died to embers. As the cabin, this sanctuary that had protected and imprisoned Josiah for 3 decades, prepared to become just a memory. Outside, the first stars appeared. And in the morning, they would ride toward Denver, toward family, toward a future neither of them had imagined possible a week ago. Sometimes salvation comes in the form of a knock at the door during a blizzard. Sometimes it comes as a brother's persistence across decades of silence. And sometimes it comes as the simple recognition that being alone isn't the same as being safe, and that the risk of connection is always worth taking.